Thanks everyone for coming. It's obviously a little bit of a difficult time with not much to do sitting in home, so good to see you. Glad we can break the monotony a bit. All right, so can you all see that? Hopefully you can. So this is Kirkafell in Iceland, up on the northern side of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because this was our first sort of big overseas photography trip, and I went and bought myself a Nikon D810 full frame camera, spent thousands on it, and a 14 to 24 lens, and then I spent thousands of dollars to get to Iceland, and this is what I got. So this is 2016, and I think what it talks to is part of the image is composition. The other part is trying to trick the camera into seeing what your eye sees. So your eye is such a delicate, fantastic device that it can see into the shadows. It can accommodate when you look up to the bright sky. It can do all the things that that your camera can't. So even though you buy an expensive camera with great dynamic range, it's still not as good as your eye. And the rest of a photographer's time is spent trying to trick the camera into seeing something like your eye sees, or versions thereof, or doing things like exposure blending, where you might take an image that exposes for the sky, one that exposes for the foreground, and then you'll blend the two images. So at minimum, you've got to put two images together to get anything similar to what your eye might see. So tonight, what I just want to look at when we look at the processing is, it's going to be reasonably simple tonight. All we're going to do is play around with the light in the image and modify how it's distributed, how we see it, various brightnesses and the like, and then you'll see with some very simple things in Photoshop how you can change what's a reasonably plain image into something that's got a little bit more interest, a little bit more drama, a little bit more atmosphere, and makes you feel a bit happier after you spend all those thousands of dollars that you've actually got something worth looking at. So there's maybe if I just quickly go around the screen so that those who aren't familiar with Photoshop can get a little bit of an idea of the controls of what we're going to do. So across the top here, I've got three images we're going to look at. This one, which is bright, is the one that's on the screen. I have some controls down the side here, which I'll use, and I have some controls down the bottom right that I'll use. And the main ones I'll use down here, if I click on this, this gives me the ability to change brightness and contrast. I can adjust things using levels and curves and exposure. I can change vibrance. I can change all these various things. So they're the controls I've got, and I'll use them in different ways. So what Photoshop does is it'll take, it's non-destructive, so it leaves the original image, and then as we're working along on the image, they're called layers, will be put on top of the original image, and the changes in those layers will then affect the original file. So that's in principle what we'll be doing in Photoshop. But I just wanted to start off firstly with a couple of other pictures, and that is for those who like their traditional Australian painting. We've got an image here by Arthur Streeton, and the reason I've got two images to look at, and the reason I'm going to show those to you is to explain just how you manipulate light in an image and the things that help control how you look at an image. All right. So there's four things that that you've got control. So after composition, you've got control of brightness, you've got control of contrast, you've got control of color and saturation, and they're the things that you use to manipulate how your eye engages and sees the image. All right. there is a fourth item that you use for engagement, and that is either a human figure or a face. So they're the four things that people react to for images. So your eye will naturally be drawn to the brightest part of the image, or the place of highest contrast, or the place of most color, or a human face or a figure. All right, so if we go back to the original image, when I'm just looking at that image right now, you can see the sky is very bright and the water in the foreground is very white. So they're the two places where my eye naturally gravitates to, all right, because at the moment they're the brightest. Because the image is quite dark, there's not much color, there's not much, nothing else to really engage with because there's so much darkness, you haven't got the detail. So your eye is currently being drawn to what is the brightest. So if we have a look at Arthur Streeton's picture here, so here's Arthur painting in 1896, 125 years ago. So Arthur's been to art school, he studied all the things that you need to study as an artist, how you manipulate light. So just start with the sky. Look what he has done with the sky. So the sky tonally is not the brightest thing in the picture. All right, so if we go back to Kirchhoff, brightest thing at the moment is the sky. In this, the sky isn't the brightest. The brightest thing is probably the little curve on the river here, followed by this curve. So they're the two brightest things, and probably this bit of yellow in the background. So that's where your eye is being taken to. It's being taken to the brightest parts. It's being taken to the places of the most color and contrast. And if you look at this image carefully, you will actually see that this area in the middle is quite saturated with color. And then the area around the outside is slightly desaturated. So if you compare the greens on the left here on the outside and you compare the greens to the middle, you can see that he's actually desaturated the color and contrast on the perimeter and increased the contrast and color in the middle. So that's where your eye is going to go, because he knows that trick. He's gone to art school, he's done all the study, he knows how people's eyes work in paintings. So as a processing tip, if this was our picture, is a raw picture, we would darken the sky a bit, we would probably desaturate the outside a bit, and we would accentuate color, tone, contrast, brightness in this middle bit, because that's where we want the eye to stay. So we don't want the eye disappearing off the corners of the picture. We don't want the eye we don't mind the eye wandering along. We don't mind it coming down along the stream, finishing off, seeing the middle of the picture here, and then off to the moonrise in the background. That's kind of what that's the game that he's playing. So he's capturing our eye and leading it through the picture, but he's got control of it. He's the one who's dictating where we look, how we look, and he's doing that by controlling brightness, contrast, and color saturation. If we have another look at another one, there's another sort of similar vein where in this image, if you can imagine, so the title of this one is, Purple Noon's Might or something. It's the middle of the day. So if you can imagine Australia, summer, middle of the day, imagine how bright that sky is, and look what he's done to it. So immediately by darkening the sky at the background, the eye is brought forward, and by the color saturation in the foreground, he's actually, he's got us looking in this bottom quarter of the picture, but there's an interesting thing going on. So if you look at the cursor here, and if you follow the river down and you get to this spot, look how blue the river is there. Look how contrasty the blue and the shadows are there. He's actually using that as a technique to give that a place for the eye to go to. So he's got saturation in this foreground. He leads us to the brightest part of the picture, which is probably here. And then our eye wanders back to this place of color plus contrast. And then we're back to the color again. So it's almost your eye is following this little triangle inside the picture, trapped by those little techniques he's used, which is controlling contrast, brightness, and color. All right. So here we are with our picture of Kirchhoff. So the other thing to give you some inspiration is this is a JPEG file. All right. So not only was I at the beginning of my photography career, didn't know about exposure blending, but I've also got a JPEG. All right. So everyone will say terror, horror, you can't get much out of a JPEG, but I'm going to demonstrate where if you've got those old travel snaps and they're JPEGs, you can do marvels with them. So usually when you open your file and you click it and take it into Photoshop, it'll go into Camera Raw if it's a raw file, and you can manipulate the image there. If it's a JPEG, it goes straight into Photoshop. But so one of the first things you do is that you always make a copy of the original file. So if you stuff things up, you've always got the original you can go back to. And if you are on a PC, that's Control J, and you will see over on, let me maybe make the screen a little bit smaller, or is this in the way? So you'll see in this panel here, where that's our original file at the very top. And this one's at the bottom, sorry, and our copy is layer 1. So that's a copy of the file. All right, and with that, I can go up the top here and I can go to, I've got to just move the screen down past the controls here. So if I go up to filter, I can go to filter, Camera Raw, and it will then open the file in Camera Raw. So if I was importing the file directly as a raw file, I would come into Camera Raw here, and this is what I would see. So the blue bits are the bits that are clipped in blacks. So they're parts of the image which are completely black, and that's just a warning in Camera Raw, just telling me that I've got some parts of the picture which are black with no other detail there. So in hindsight, I should have maybe taken a shot which exposed for the darks, because I haven't got any clipping for the brights, but I do have for the blacks. So this is the panel we've got in Camera Raw on the right-hand side. And when you first come in, you've got these various controls. All right, so in basic, you've got you can control exposure, contrast, highlights, all the things that you want to control. It gives you a curves control. Enables you to play around with detail. It enables you to play around with hue, saturation, and luminance. It enables you to play around with color grading. It enables you to it's a slightly different menu, but if it comes from Camera Raw, you're able to do lens adjustment. So it's got profiles in there for your various lenses, and it'll take the distortion out of the image based on the lens profile. You can play around with the geometry. So here on vertical, I can play around with, you know, if I want to change, if I pointed the camera at the ground and I needed to adjust that, if I was pointing slightly left or right, I can adjust the left and the right. I can do all those sorts of things with geometry. I can change aspect ratio. I can make things wider. So I've got all those sorts of geometry controls. There's some effects and there's some calibration you can do, but I don't use any of those. So I tend to either I'll do the optics adjustment, I'll do some work on the geometry, and I mainly do it in the basics. And so if you wanted to do something really simple as a Photoshop thing, you could bring your image into Camera Raw and you could hit auto. So on the top here, Photoshop will run an algorithm where it thinks is the best adjustment. So if I hit auto, you'll see what Camera Raw thinks I should be doing with the photo. So it's up the exposure a bit, it's up the contrast a bit, it's decreased the highlights, it's up the shadows, it's done some things to the white. So it's done some adjustments in there. And you can see immediately, without doing too much, I've gone from a pretty ordinary photo that didn't have much going for it. I'll just go down here and fix up the optics because the geometry, because I'm still a little bit spread to the left. So we'll put that back to 0. And we'll go back to the basics. As a starting point, that is usually what I would do. I'll hit auto and see what Photoshop thinks I should be doing with it. And then I can do some adjustments myself. So one of the things I always do, and you'll see as I move the slider, is if I slide the highlights to the left, I reclaim all the details in the sky. So if I slide it to the right, you can see what it was probably like in the file that came in. But if I slide highlights to the left, usually to about 85%. You can see the extra detail I get in the sky, dropping out all those burnt out sections and just reclaim a bit of detail. So I always do that because the skies always, I find that the skies always need that happening to it. And those areas which are black, sometimes I will overcompensate on the shadows to try and get a bit of that back. So I will probably crank up the shadows a little bit at this stage, just so I've got a little bit of detail to play with in when I'm in Photoshop. These three sliders here, texture, clarity, and dehaze, what I've been doing with these adjustments so far is global. They affect the whole picture, and it applies the profile to the whole picture. When it comes to texture, clarity, and dehaze, I don't always want it on all the picture. So let me show you what will happen. So if I dehaze it a bit, it does exactly what the name says, and it knocks dehaze out. But what it does is that it, so one of the things we're trying to do in a landscape image is to give the sense of depth. So I've got the traditional layout for landscape photography is foreground, midground, background. So by dehazing, what it does is it gives added strength to the background, which I don't necessarily want, and the midground I don't necessarily want. So if I go the opposite, for instance, and I increase or I decrease the amount of dehaze, you can see that I'm getting that sense of distance by the, just by that, just like looking at the blue mountains, you get that blue haze. So in Iceland here, it hasn't got a eucalyptus, but we've got the haze to the distance. So dehazing destroys that sense of depth. So I don't tend to dehaze much. The next one is, I'll take that back to 0. The next one is clarity, and clarity there again, sort of, you can see the effect that it does. It just cranks it up and adds all that contrast between the lights and the dark. And there again, I might want that in the foreground, but I don't necessarily want it in the midground or background. And the same with texture. Texture is a fine version of clarity. And there again, I don't necessarily want that to the whole image. So what I will tend to do is at this stage, I will take the image into Photoshop and I'll work on it. And at the points where I might want to add clarity or I might want to add texture selectively, I'll take the image back into Camera Raw and have another go at it. But at this stage, for setting up to work on a drawing, on a photo, this is kind of the starting point. So you can see that, so that then imports it in. So you can see with one very simple maneuver in Camera Raw, all I did was hit auto, and the image has immediately improved in visual worth enormously. So I'm now not feeling so bad that I spent all that money on the camera. Or the trip to Iceland. The trip to Iceland was fantastic. All right, so at this stage, I've got to make some assessments on what I'm going to do and where the light is falling, because essentially what I'm trying to do is enhance what I've captured. So there's no point trying to work against the things that are in your photo. What you do is, at the moment I've got the light coming in from the right. I've got some nice wash of the light across that this area of the grass in the midground. I've got a nice sense of the light giving some relief to Kirkafell. So for those who haven't been to Iceland, a fell is a mountain and a foss is a waterfall. So the waterfall is Kirkjufoss and the mountain is Kirkjufell. And the two of them together is Kirkjufell and Kirkjufoss, but generally known as Kirkjufell. Kirk being church, so it's a church mountain. So that's what it's called. So church mountain, church waterfall, Kirkjufell, Kirkjufoss. So cast your mind back to our friend Arthur Streeton, and I still have an issue with the sky, don't I? The sky is a lot brighter. It's tending to distract me because I'm looking through to the sky. So I'll just quickly do this. So you don't need to necessarily copy along, but I'm going to break the image into 3 parts, and I'm just going to play with those to demonstrate to you what we can do with light within the image. So this is the quick selection tool. All right, so if I choose that, you can see here I can use my square brackets and I can make that little circle bigger or smaller. It's got a little cross in the middle of it. All right. And if I click and hold, it actually defines an area using marching ants. And what I'll do is I will do that. So I've got this area defined by marching ants by my quick selection tool. And then I will go down to my, move that up a bit. I'll go down to these controls. And if I click on brightness and contrast, what it will do is it'll put that selection in a brightness and contrast layer. All right, so you can see what happened there. So up here in brightness and contrast, I now have a mask. And the mask is the white bit is the bit that I selected, and the rest of the picture is in black. And to the left of that, I've got the control of the mask. So if I click on that, I've got the control of brightness and contrast. All right, so with the control of brightness and contrast, if I decrease brightness, it only applies to what I selected. And if I increase brightness, it only applies to what I selected. And the same with contrast. I can increase contrast, I can decrease contrast. And it only applies to the bit that I've selected and the bit that's been masked. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'll just create two more. So I've created a mask for the background. And then I'll come in here with my quick selection tool. And I'll just, this is just a quick and ready one. We will do a more accurate one at a later date. I'm going to come around and I'm going to kind of select what I'm calling the midground. All right, so well, there again, I've made my selection. I come down here to my adjustment layer. I choose brightness and contrast, and it puts that selection in a brightness and contrast. And you can see there, the white is the bit that was selected. I then have a brightness and contrast control for the midground. All right, so I can brighten and darken just the midground. All right. And then I'll do one for the foreground. All right, so I'll just, and I'm only doing it roughly here. I can be much more accurate, but just for this exercise to demonstrate what we're going to do with lighting in the picture, I'll just do a quick selection just so that we don't spend the whole hour fine-tuning selections. So with the plus, I can tell it what I want. If I go up here and I choose the minus, I can come along and take things out of the selection. I can knock the selection back. So with the minus, I can just tidy up a few of those things that maybe I don't want in the selection and do it like that. And then I'll come down here, I'll choose my brightness and contrast, and then I've got a mask for the foreground. And if I click on this little thing on the left, there again, I control the lightness and the darkness in the foreground. All right, so you can probably see where I'm going with this. So if I'm thinking like Arthur Streeton, I go to my sky and I think, well, what happens if I darken my sky? And if I just look at the effect of darkening my sky, look what's happened to the picture. Look how my eye, instead of being drawn to the sky, now gets probably drawn to this area because this is now the brightest part of the picture. All right? So immediately I've changed the way that my eye is engaging with the picture purely by darkening the sky. All right? I can then have a look at the midground. All right, so then with the midground, I could say, well, having done that, what happens if I brighten the midground a little bit? So I emphasize the sense of that light coming across from the right. And then I've got a choice, of course, when I get to the foreground, is that I can then choose to either darken the foreground back again, so I look past the foreground, or I can brighten the foreground right up, so that the foreground is something that I then look at on my way looking into the picture. So I've now got three ways of structuring or modifying how I engage with the picture, each with different effects. All right, so I could darken the foreground. I can go to the background and I can darken the background. So then I've just got a beam of light running right through the middle of my picture here. So I've got that nice sunny beam running right through highlighting Kirchhoffel. That might be something that I choose. Or I can make Kirchhoffel, if you like, a silhouette. All right, and then if Kirchhoffel's the silhouette, I can then, with Kirchhoffel as a silhouette, I can brighten up the sky again, and I can brighten up the foreground. And now Kirchhoffel is sitting sort of ominously in the middle of the picture as a silhouette. All right, so immediately I've got a different way that I can engage with the picture. All right. Now with the selections that I've made with those masks, I'm able to modify those masks. All right. So each one of these. So let's put them all back to roughly 0, so that the picture is looking a little bit not too weird and wonderful. Right. So say, so on the right-hand side, I now have these 3 masks. I've got so what I can do is I can rename them. All right. So I can rename this one Sky. I can rename, if I double click on it, it highlights it, and I can get access to it. So I can call this one Midground. And I can double click on this one and I can call this one Foreground. So I can keep track of what these things are. All right. So with each of these masks, I can do other things with them. All right. So you probably saw down here where I've got these other things I can do. I can change the hue and saturation based on the mask as well. So what I can do is if I highlight, let's do it on the sky. So if I highlight the sky mask and I come down to here to these changes, I can click on hue and saturation, and it adds another layer in there called hue and saturation. And in this little column down the little bottom here, this little thing here is enables me to have that adjustment only apply to the mask below it. So if I click it, you can see how that mask now applies only to this layer. All right. So with this mask, if I click on that adjustment, I can now change the saturation just of the sky as well. All right. So not only can I change the brightness, I can change the saturation all with the one mask. So if I was so inclined, I could come along here and I could change the brightness. And then if I go to my hue and saturation level, I can also desaturate it. So not only do I darken it, but I lose its saturation. All right. So looking at various options that the eye is drawn to color, to brightness, to everything else, I could choose to desaturate and darken the sky. And then I can come along to my midground and I can choose to brighten my midground. Right. So immediately, so these little eyes on the side, if I click those, it turns the adjustment off. So what I can do is I can then compare where I started with those little adjustments to where I'm finished. And you can see, even with those, I've now made Kirkefell the feature of the image because of the way that I've treated the light and the brightness of the sky and the way that it's moved within the image. All right. So and these aren't, you can see how easily they are done. They're not very, it's just a matter of learning the various tools and what they do, but you can see how quickly in 10 or 15 minutes, we've completely changed the nature of the image. Right. So let's just look at some other options. All right. So this here, so I can do the same with my midground. So I can come along and I can click on the midground layer. I can come down here. I can choose a hue and saturation layer. I can clip that hue and saturation layer to the midground, and then I can play with the saturation of the midground. All right. I can turn the thing black and white and then leave color in the foreground, or I can change, so I can change the saturation. I can also change this little hand here. I've got the option of, if I click on it, and if I use the color picker to choose a color, if I click and hold on the color, if I slide to the right, it saturates that color. If I slide to the left, it desaturates that color. So if I wanted to give a boost to the yellows, I could, by color picker, choose the yellows and then slide that to the right a bit. I could choose the reds here, and I could slide the reds a bit to give them a bit more of a punch. And if I wanted to desaturate the green, I could come along here, pick the green, slide it to the left while I'm holding it, and you can see how the green gets desaturated. A lot of yellow in the green, right? So I'm able to do some adjustments there where I'm changing the hue and saturation just of the mask that I've used. Right? Now, I can also modify the mask. So if I click on this, that shows you the mask. It shows you so that was an Alt click. So if I hold down the Alt button and I click with the mouse, that shows me the mask. All right, so you can see there the outline of the mask, and it's quite a hard-edged mask. And essentially, if it's black, it hides it. If it's white, you can see it. All right. So if I click and hold it again, you can see what the mask is. So I could, if I wanted to, come across here and select the pen, this little pen tool. And down here, I can choose the color. So if I click here between the two, I can choose between black and white. So if I choose a black pen, I can actually modify the mask, because I can come along here and I can brush areas out that the mask is affecting. All right, so this side of the mountain, I might say, well, I don't really want that effect on that side of the mountain. And I don't really want the effect just in the little bit of foreground here. And you can see that I have actually, if we have a look at the mask again, you can see what I've done. I've actually brushed with my pen and I've modified the mask. So the mask is now controlling the full effect. So I'm getting the full effect where it's white, but where I've brushed it out with my brush, then it's actually reducing the effect. So I'm able to, for instance, having decided that I was going to brighten that whole mid area, I might come along and I might say, well, actually, I don't want to do all of it. I just really want to do this little bit on the foreground. If I've made a mistake, I then go back and I change it to a white pen and I'll brush the brightness back in, up onto the top of the mountain here, so that I'm getting more control on the mask and what the mask is doing.
Just how to click the mask.
Okay, so clipping the mask by control. So the clipping the mask was a question. So if we do another one up here, so on the foreground, if I go down to brightness and contrast and choose a brightness and contrast one, well, let's do a hue and saturation. Let's do a hue and saturation in the foreground. I click that and I've got my new mask. So to clip that mask, to clip that adjustment to that mask, I come down to the next layer down on the bottom and I use this little box with the arrow down. I think if I can, no, that's probably the simplest one for you. So you click on that one there and you can see, if I click and unclick, you can see where it's now saying that applies just to the layer that's below it. All right, and it won't apply to it. So for instance, with the hue and saturation, if it's not clipped and I do hue and saturation adjustment, you can see it does it to the whole picture. All right, so at this stage, that adjustment layer, because it's sitting at the top, affects all the layers down below it. So I can change the saturation, I can change the hue, I can change it into greens and blues and oranges and reds. So all of those changes apply to the whole picture. But if I go click on the mask, on the adjustment, come down here and clip it to the layer below, then that adjustment only happens then to the layer that it's attached to. Okay, does that answer that question? All right, so then I will then so if we've desaturated the background, we could also come along and desaturate the foreground a little bit. And the effect of desaturating the foreground, as you can see, so if the foreground's quite saturated, it comes into our vision, it comes into what we are looking at, because it's more prominent, it's brighter, it's got more color. But if I desaturate it, then my eye is engages with it, but tends to look past. So what I've done is desaturate the foreground, desaturate the background, darken the background, and I've brightened the foreground, the midground, all right, to get that, that sort of effect of the light running through. So these sort of large area adjustments, I can also choose to do that again on a small way. All right, so I might come along here with my quick selection tool, and I might say, well, on top of what I've done, what I want to do is just make this area of Kirkerfell. We'll go back and we'll do the minus and we'll take some of that out. We might say that, well, I just want to make that part of Kirkerfell a bit brighter. So I can then do another mask. I can do another brightness and adjustment mask, and I can adjust just the foreground of Kirkerfell, right? Just that little bit. And then you can see that it's looking a little bit raggedy around the edges. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come along and I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to change my brush to a black brush, and I'm going to make with my, I'm going to make those a little bit smaller, and then the raggedy edge I can then brush out. All right, so I can leave the adjustment, blend it in a little bit more selectively. All right, so I might just so it's applying across the foreground there. And if I turn that on and off, you can see just that little bit of effect I'm having on the foreground. So I can be quite selective with that tool as to how I'm going to then deal with the image. Likewise, I could come along here and I could say, well, you know, it's that time of the day. I need a plus to be able to adjust it, little left square bracket to make it smaller. I can say, well, I reckon the sun might have been falling just on that, on the rocks on the edge there. And when the sun was falling, it might have also been sort of running across a little bit there. So I can sort of say, well, what's it look like if the sun was engaging with the top of the rocks there? And I might come along and I might do a brightness and contrast adjustment here. And I might say, well, what happens if I just brighten those rocks a little bit? All right, I'll just bring out the brightness a little bit. I might add a little bit of contrast. All right, so that I can then do a little minor adjustment on those rocks to then sort of bring those out as if the sun's been, you know, the sun might just sort of come through and catch that, pick up the wash of the light as it comes through. All right, so they're what I would use for the sort of major adjustments in the picture. And then when I get it to a level that I like, I then start using curves and other tools once I've got the major stuff in place. All right, but if I look at just look at what the image is doing at the moment, this part of Kirkerfell is now sort of the brightest by colour, followed up by the waterfall. So I've kind of got a little bit of a pattern going here with my eye from the waterfall. It sort of leads in on the left with the rush of the water through the waterfall up to the mountain. And then I've also got this view of the water sort of running out to the ocean up on the right there. So that's either good or bad. So the option for my eye is that my eye can actually follow this waterway, get to the edge here, and it's off the page. All right, so that's not fantastic, but it does give you the sense of space beyond. You know? So there's some pros and cons against that. All right, so I'll show you another way of adjusting, and that's just by using curves. All right, so we've got these adjustments. Each one of these are a level. So I can there again turn all of this off, and we're back to the original image. I can choose to only turn some of them on, but if I turn all of them on, then I get all the adjustments that we've made. Right? Now down here, I've also got as well as brightness and contrast, I've got curves. So if I click on the curves layer, you can see that it's put a curves adjustment. That's the mask. This is the adjustment. And we've got a line that goes from top right to bottom left. And in the background is the histogram. Right? It shows you from brights to midtones to blacks. All right. So I can either click on this little thing on the bottom, and what it does is it drags that adjustment in. So what it's doing is that as it moves across, it's saying everything beyond that point is black. All right, so essentially that's what it's doing. It's just blackening off the image as I draw it in. And then the same on the other side, if I draw the whites in, then what it's doing is it's brightening the whites, because of what it's saying is that all the values to the right of where that point is white. All right. I can also click and drag the middle of the curve, which is what curves are, and I can do an adjustment based on a curve, which means it's progressive. It affects the blacks less, it affects the whites less, and it has most effect on the midtones because I'm pulling the curve down in the middle. All right. So what I can do is that I can do an adjustment like that to generally darken the picture. And I have my curve layer and it's white. If I go Control-I for invert, what that does is it lets me see through the adjustment, but then I can brush some of the adjustment onto the picture. All right, so what I can do is I go over here and I select my pen tool. And because I have a black mask, I need a white pen to affect the black mask. So I click on this to change to my white pen. And then you'll see what happens as I brush. So I'm getting a much bigger brush. Brush settings, I usually, up here, I usually go for a hardness of 0. I usually go for an opacity of 30%, and I go for a flow of 50%. So I'll show you in a minute the difference between all those, but at the moment, that's what I use. And what I can do is as I brush with my pen, you can see that the darkening that I made with the curve, I can brush onto the picture where I choose with my pen. So I can say, well, I quite like the idea of darkening the sky and darkening the side there. I might darken across here a little bit, and I might do a little bit across the midground there. All right, so I have selectively darkened the picture by using a curve layer. I can do another one of those where I can brighten using the curve layer. All right, so if I put another curve layer in, and then this time if I drag that curve up, you can see it brightens. I can come along with, I've got I invert that effect, the mask, and it becomes a black mask. I then want my white brush, and with my white brush on my black background, I can then brush some of that effect in. So the brightening, I can choose to brighten up with my brush areas that are affected by the curve. So I might say, well, I want to give a little bit more light to the waterfall to highlight into the foreground. Maybe and if you want to undo what you were doing, if you change the brush back to a black brush, then the black brush will fill in what you've just done and take it out of what you've done. So I might say, well, I made a mistake there with the sky, so let's brush that back in. Right? And I've got an ability then to selectively with my brush, lighten and darken beyond the foreground, midground, background general adjustments, which I did earlier on. Right? So if we start looking at what we've done here, we've taken a rather flat, plain picture with a bright, dominant sky, and I've inverted that by darkening the sky, brightening the midground, brightening the foreground to get a little bit of detail into it. Right? So there's lots of other things that you can do to the image, and you can then start working selectively. So I might say, well, this little bit of a spit along here, it'd be nice if that was a little bit brighter, so that this light that came down Kirkfell actually drew me across to the water. So I might do another curve adjustment. And what I'll be looking at here is only the effect that the curve has on that little spit across the water. And I can actually adjust it here. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, well, lighten the lights, but don't touch the blacks so much so that I maintain a bit of contrast. All right, I invert that layer. I get a shortcut for brush is B, And if I want to make the circle bigger or smaller, my square brackets, if I press the square left bracket, that will make it smaller, or the right one to make it bigger. And then I can just, I need the white brush. And then with that little bit of white brush, I can then just brush in that brightening that I've selected just across the spit. All right, so now I'm sort of bringing the light down the mountain across the spit onto the water. So I'm making the view to the midground. That's my selection. So I've decided that's where I want to look to. I want to see the effect of the light coming down Kirkerfell. I want to see the light sort of sheeting across this grass on the right-hand side. A little bit of detail in the rocks of the waterfall, but I'm not so much interested in the waterfall as I am in the. I'm just sort of touching up that edge along there with the brush, brighten up that little bit, and then I've got more of a sense of the light washing over the landscape there. Yeah. Now you've probably all been looking at the picture, saying, "When's he going to get rid of those people?" All right. So so to do that, I need to have a plain layer to work on, and I'm going to use this little tool over here, which rubs things out, the spot healing brush. Right. So if I choose that as a new blank layer, and I come along here and I choose my rubbing out person, I've got my little circle. I usually make the circle just a little bit bigger than the object, and I come along and I click on those pesky little people, and I can get rid of the people out of the picture. All right, because what it's doing is it does a content aware fill and uses the things around it to fill in the bits. So I might choose, whether I want some human scale in there to give a bit of a sense of what the picture is like. But these guys up here, we might just get rid of them. And I'm not sure I want that the hay bales there. So I might get rid of those. And I might, you can come along, and if there's a few little annoying things, you can get rid of that little white spot here or a little white spot there. Or if you've got any dust spots up in the sky, this is the tool that you would use for getting rid of them. And then if I want to zoom in a bit, it's Control Plus. All right, so Control Plus will zoom me in. And I can kind of say, well, I don't really need a Pajero running up the road, so why don't we get rid of the Pajero? And I can be a little bit more selective about in detail what we're doing. So you can see I've got a little halo here from that other adjustment we've done. We're not going to do halos today, but we will do halos in another section, but we can get rid of those halos. So Control minus zooms out, Control plus zooms in. So now I've got an image where I've left two people in there for reference for scale. I've brightened the area through the middle to give a little bit more sort of direction as to what I want people to look at in the picture, and I've darkened off the things that are a distraction. So by way of simple techniques and quick techniques, you can see just what you can do with an image, and I'll just turn these on and off so you can see where we started from and where we have come to. Bearing in mind again that this is a JPEG file, doesn't have all the detail of a RAW file, but there's still enough information in there for me to play around with it to be able to produce an image that's got quite a bit more interest in it than what we started with. So I thought I'd keep it short and sweet tonight. So that's our hour, but I'm happy to stay online as long as people want. If they want to ask questions, if they want to talk about specific controls in Photoshop or what they want to do. So at this point too, I'll just remind you, if you go to wanderlust.sydney, and then you go to the workshop page and go down the bottom of that, you can put your email address in there. So for the next get together, it can't be Tuesday next week because I'm presenting at North's Camera Club on Tuesday. So it's either going to be Monday or Wednesday, and probably Wednesday at this stage, but we'll send out an email. But if you'd like to be on the email list and get an invite for for next week's, then just click on and hop on and get part of that mailing list. And then we can give you the details. And we'll send you the image, the link to the image before the night, so everyone gets a chance to actually download and play along. So let me just
I
show
guess
you
also, just let me jump
Yep.
in there for a second. Also, if you've got a particular topic in editing that's particularly bugging you, let's pop it in chat and we'll see if we can add it in to next week's session.
Let me just show you one other cool thing, and that is above. So for doing this, I've got to have all the information, and to combine all the information from all those layers, it's Control-Alt-Shift-E. Bit of a mouthful, but what it does is it combines all those adjustments and puts them in a new layer. But if I do that and I've got all those to play with, then I can do some pretty cool things, which I'm about to show you. So just above the quick selection tool is the lasso tool. All right, so if I click on the lasso tool, and this little bit of pavement here kind of annoys me. So what I can do is I can lasso this little area here, and it creates a separate little area. So it does the same thing. So it's a selection tool, but it uses a lasso. And then if I put my mouse in the middle and I right click, it's got the option of fill. If I click on fill, I've got the option in here where I can fill it with a background, foreground color, black or white, all these sorts of things, or it's content aware. So what it will do, it will sample the patterns and the colors around, and it will fill that little bit with those. So let's have a go and see what happens with that. So I click OK, and I've got rid of my my parking lot. How's that? That's a cool little tool, isn't it? So that's the little content aware fill. So that's another little toy which we can show you how to use. So I hope that's been of use to a few. Mainly, the main thing was in just referencing back, just looking at what other visual artists have done, because most photographers. So you know, Arthur Streeton, he's gone off to art school and he studied, you know, composition. He studied color. He studied, you know, all these things. He's got all the background information, the same stuff that we actually need as photographers. But most photographers have only come to it as a hobby, and they haven't actually studied any haven't got any formal art training. So the whole idea about learning composition, learning about color theory, learning about what contrast and brightness does, it's new to photographers. But to actually get further in photography, you've got to start grappling with those basic things that a visual artist plays with. And the more that you can play with those and learn from people who've done it before, you know, we're talking 125 years ago for Arthur Streeton. So obviously there's 125 years worth of stuff in the art gallery in New South Wales you never look at and see who's played with what and who's done successfully and how they've done it. So you just look at what other visual artists have done, how they've manipulated, how they control the eye and how they compose. And then that informs you for your own work, because you can shortcut the process and let other people make the mistakes and stand on other people's shoulders, learning how to process and add value to your images. So yeah, there we go. So I shall stop the share there. So I hope that's been entertaining for a Tuesday evening, and you've all been able to get a little bit of an insight into a thing or two. So
we'll see you back here next. It's not Tuesday evening, is it?
We'll go for Wednesday. I think it's probably Wednesday evening, but we'll send out the email. So if you get, just head on down, get yourself on that email list, and then we'll advise you when the next get together is and provide a link for that. So tonight, I thought we would do that as an introduction, just playing with light and how you move light around an image. And then we'll just develop some of the other controls in Photoshop as we go. So, and if you want to revisit some of the tools and how you do some of the things, I'm happy to help you with that. But this was just really a bit of an introduction just to show how you can make an enormous difference in your image with some reasonably simple techniques. and just a different way of thinking, just the way that you you divide your image up. You then look at what the light's doing. You have a bit of a look at what the natural virtues of your image are, and just how you might enhance those. So yeah, just it's fun. It then becomes, so it gets to the stage. It's a bit like the Karate Kid movie. All right, it's where you got to do all the wax on, wax off, do all the practicing, and once you get a little bit familiar with the tools that you have beforehand, then it opens up a whole different world for you, because you then have control on your image, much more control. You've got much more ability to make choices as to how you edit, rather than just being stuck with what the camera gives you. All right, because as sort of started in the beginning, the camera, why be dictated to by the camera? All right, you've seen the image, you've seen the landscape, you've experienced the landscape. You want to take control of the process so that the images that you come up with, you've got control on. The camera isn't telling you what you're going to be able to have. All right, so it's just a very easy way to regain control of the process and have a little bit more input into the image and what you get to see. So.
Right, so we'll take you to another country next week.
Or we might go to another part of Iceland. Who can tell?
Well, we'll circumnavigate it again.
One of the reasons I chose that image was that it was.
Might have to find some birds or some horses next time.
Maybe you could do the next one with the birds and the horses.
I'm itching.
But I think one of the reasons I actually chose that was because it was a JPEG file. So you know, there's always that. You know, everyone always tells you from all the Photoshop classes, you know, you got to have a RAW to be able to work on. You know, you're throwing away all that information. But you can see, I'm just you know, during lockdown, I'm revisiting all my old trips and my JPEG files, and you can see just with that image alone what you can do with a JPEG. So they're not hopeless. JPEGs still have an awful lot of information that you can play with. You can play with all the brightness, and you know, it's got all those controls that you need. So never throw an image out. So, you know, you might say, well, you know, I can't do anything with it. It's only a JPEG. Well, I've had a couple of JPEGs that I've turned into competition images. So JPEGs are fine. So there's no shame in a JPEG.
No shame in a JPEG.
No shame in a JPEG.
Yeah. Okay, if there's no questions, I think, from everybody, no questions coming up in chat, then we might finish it there, I think.
Yep. Everyone happy with that?
Thanks for coming. We're really happy. Thank you. Thank you. We're really happy.
As we say,
did not expect the size of the turnout. Yeah.
As we say, just get yourself on that mailing list and then you can be kept up to date. So we're going to do one a week. So so essentially if lockdown finishes at the end of August, there's 4. If lockdown keeps on going, you'll get another couple. So, so take advantage of it while you can. So, but it also gives you the opportunity, you know, part of it is having the confidence to open the program. And once you've opened the program, what do I do? Where do I start? How do I play with it? And hopefully tonight's giving you a little bit of an idea about where you can start, but also gives you the option of having seen what's possible with those few adjustments. You can have a bit of a play yourself even with those. So this, the other thing I should say is that this is being recorded. So what we'll also do is that we'll post a copy of the recording on YouTube. So if you have a look in a day or so when we've done that, then if you need to replay it, have a bit of a look at other stuff and, you know, missed a bit that I went through, then you'll be able to replay and stop and start the video and have a look at that. So each of these, the one each week will be able to be, you know, reinterrogated at your leisure. So hopefully it'll be a helpful resource for you. I don't play with Lightroom much anymore, but I understand that you can mask in Lightroom. So I think of the last edition, there's an ability, so I can have a look at that. for you. But even if you use Dr. Google and you Google masking in Lightroom, I think there's now a quick mask option in Lightroom, so that you can have them. So I think you can see by what we did tonight, the ability to accurately mask gives you so much more control in a picture. And that's the virtue of apart from, you'll see in the subsequent things that we do, where we start stretching, moving, blending, doing other things, that's where you need Photoshop to be able to do that. But if you're just doing general adjustments for lightness, contrast, those sorts of things, you do most of that in Lightroom. So if you're familiar with Grant Galbraith's work, so Grant does a lot of beautiful black and white work. He works solely in Lightroom. So that's all he does. He doesn't venture into Photoshop. It's all Lightroom. So you can do a lot of the adjusting and a lot of the blending that we were looking at tonight in Lightroom. It's just that accurate masking just gives you so much more control. And you'll see in subsequent weeks that there's lots of other adjustments that I do. I actually stretch and I move and I warp and I do other things. That's what I need the Photoshop to do as well. I've got to be able to do it all in one place. So rather than doing some in Lightroom and some in Photoshop, I tend to do it all in Photoshop, just because that's what I'm familiar with, and that's what it's. So once you start learning a few basics, a bit like you can see tonight, you don't have to. There's not too many controls we use. There's only about 4 or 5 controls, and just in 4 or 5 controls, you can see the amazing impact you can have on an image. So even though it looks a daunting sort of program, with a couple of sort of introductory, what do I need to learn from this to actually operate this thing? Then with a few little simple adjustment techniques, then you can see that the power of Photoshop is pretty enormous. There you go. Elaine wants to look at your what you do, some birds and some horses. So what's the typical adjusted file size from original to new? If you think about it, so that image tonight was a 15 megabyte file. And if you have a look up the side here, what's the final size of the file? Let me just save it for you and I'll tell you how big it is after all those adjustments. Yep, just give me 2 seconds and I will find out from Mark how big the file is. It's all saved. Some of the bigger ones I work on. There we go. So it's now 475 megabytes. All right. So with all those adjustments we've done, so essentially you can add. It can end up getting pretty big. So some of the bigger ones I work on get up to around 1 gigabyte by the time you're adding and adjusting layers and blending images, and especially if you're working off a file that's a 40, 50, 60 megabyte file, when you start copying 6 or 7 of those and then doing adjustments on them, then the files end up being pretty big. So but you can see with that, Photoshop was quite happily working away on a 500 megabyte file without any delays or anything. So it's quite a powerful program. Am I working on 8 or 16-bit? Oh, good grief. I don't know, Peter. It's probably 16. I think it's 16 because I'm using the bigger color space. So I'm using, so say it's 16. I haven't. You're muted there, Robbie.
Oh, look at that, I'm muted. So 16-bit if your monitor can read all those colors that there are to offer there. But generally a lot of competitions just want 8-bit so that they can see it. It's not always beneficial to have 16-bit.
There you go. Mr. Groundwater's corrected me. It's 8-bit, and it's probably because it's a JPEG file. All right. So that would it's probably because it's not a as I say, it's only a 15 megabyte file. So when I import the bigger ones, I think it's in 16. But even so, 8-bit, you can see the amount of impact we can get in 8-bit. So, you know, JPEG, we've got a JPEG file at 8-bit, and look at what we can do. So you've got the lowest end of the spectrum, and you can still do you know, amazing things with not much. The other thing you can do is if you have a low resolution file, we might do that as a separate exercise. Photoshop, I'm not sure if it still comes with a link in, but there's a resizing program called On1. And often what people do is that they will bring in their, say, 5 megabyte file and upsize it in On1 to, you know, 15 megabyte, and then start working on it from there. So what On1 does is it takes all the pixels that you've got, spreads the pixels apart to the desired dimension that you want it to go to, then infills with AI new pixels. All right, so it actually adds pixels so that you go from an image that might be an A4 to an A3, but what it does is it takes the pixels of the A4, spreads them out to an A3 size, and then adds pixels as interpolative pixels in between it to do the upsize. So I've successfully, I do that for when we're printing large for work. So I can print up with a 42 megabyte file. I can print an image 1 meter by 1 meter with resolution that's good enough to stand, you know, a foot away from. So with the AI gigapixel, it ends up being a file that it's about 800 or 900 megabytes. But AI gigapixel or On1 resize, that will upsize your image so that it's able to be 300 dpi and printed using that upsizing software. So there's all sorts of tricks. So I know that if you want to get a bit more resolution, so if you've got a file that is only good at sort of an A5 size, you can probably get it up to an A3 size using the resize software. So you do the resize thing at the beginning and then work on it as the resized image. So there's lots of opportunity for all those old travel pics that might be only, you know, the 6x4 sort of size. If you want to get them up a little bit more, the 6x4s will happily get up to an A4 size without any loss of quality, because there's enough information there for the software programs to increase and add the pixels for 6x4 to get you up to an A4 size. So lots of hope for all those old travel snaps.
Nothing more in chat there. Oh, here we go. Elaine, can you just remind me about the new tool that selects around an animal and doesn't lose any of the hair and fur? With it, yeah.
All right. There is a. All right.
That's W on the keyboard. I'm a kinesthetic learner.
I'll open up Light Photoshop again.
Yeah.
And just share that, and I'll show you the. I need to share the screen.
It's called the Refine Edge tool, Elaine.
Yeah.
It's very finicky.
Oh, it is. So let me share the screen. I'm going to share that one.
You haven't got anything happening there.
How's that?
Yep, you haven't got. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute.
Sharing.
That's not me. It's all right.
Thank you. I'll just open another file that has a subject. So bear with me for 2 seconds. Let's find a subject. Talk amongst yourselves. All right, let's go to Alcazar. Just because you asked so nicely, I'll see if I can find a bird. An out of focus bird. Here we go. It's going to open. All right, so we can see our falcon. Is that on the screen, Robbie?
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
Okay. So if I just do an auto, so this is open. This is one of the ones where it's open in Camera Raw immediately because it's a raw file. So I've just clicked auto. I might drag the highlights back again a bit, increase some shadows. And then with this one, I might actually give a little bit of texture so it raises the fur on the feathers a bit. All right, so I'll open that. All right, so with the quick selection tool, if I click on the quick selection tool, you can see that it opened up the menu up the top, and I can go select subject. So if I go select subject, what Photoshop will do is you can see that it's put the marching ants around the bird. All right, so it's actually done the selection for me. I've got to do a little bit of work because it hasn't picked up the bit between the leather strapping and the edge of the bird. But if I then click the box next to it, which select the mask and accept that masking, you can see that the red is everything is not going to take and that's left the bird. And then I can do a refine edge on that. So what I can do is that with my little mask here, if I zoom in a bit and we have a bit of a look, what I can do with my refine edge is I can come along here and I can select with the little red dot, the little red cross. I can come along and I can paint in the bits that it hasn't masked properly there. And I can also, along the edge of the bird, for the edge of the feather, I can come along and just adjust the mask so it picks up the fluff of the edge of the feather. All right, so you can see how there where it's feathering the mask out. So down here it's missed a little bit. So we can.
It's a very finicky tool, though. It generally it's such a precise action that it's doing that it generally won't want to go over the area more than once.
Right,
so sometimes you think you could go back over it and it won't work again, and that's because it doesn't want to revisit it.
That's right. So you can see here where I'm just sort of working that edge and getting it to feather out a bit more, and the same with these edges. But so some of you are sitting back there saying, well, what am I going to do with these masks? Because you haven't worked with Photoshop before. What I can do is if I accept that mask, what do I do? Control J, and I'll put in a new...
Control J.
Yeah. Control J, so you can see up here where it's put the bird selection just in that layer. All right, so I can now turn off the original layer and I've got just the bird. All right, so what I can do is I can go Control A for everything, Control C for copy. I can go back to my picture of Kirkefell and I can go Control V, and I can put myself a bird in Kirkefell. All right, so I can go, and then I go Control T for transpose, and then I can move my bird around and I can put my bird in the corner of Kirkefell. All right, so I've been able to get an accurate enough mask to be able to then use my selection for something else. So that's the power of the masking, is that you can go from the original image. So you can take a bit from one image and put it in another image. Or with this one, for instance, what I could do is I could put this against the sky. All right, so I could come along here. I've got a library of skies which I've made. So if we click here and I go here to skies, all right. So if I want a nice stormy sky, I can drag my sky on. Just I can fill my image full of sky. But then what I do is I move my sky layer down below the bird, and here's my bird on a sky. Right? So I'm able to do stuff once I've made the selection with the tool. I can then save the bird as a library file. I can use that later for some other purpose. So I've got lots of tricks that I can do once I've mastered. So that's that is going through the quick selection tool, but then at the top using select subject and then refining the edge with the select and mask function. As you can see, it's done a pretty good job at, look at the feathers around its neck there. It's done a pretty good job on the feathers there. There's a couple of spots I might need to tidy up, but I would go back and take my time and just tidy those up before I did the final one. But just as a quick exercise, you can see how easy that is to achieve. So, for instance, now that we have that layer, we've learnt how you can clip a adjustment brightness and contrast. So brightness and contrast, I can come along and clip that to the bird layer. So now I can make the bird brighter and darker. I've got control over that layer. Just using that tool that we used before, where you clip the adjustment to the layer below. So for instance, I might say, well, let's darken the bird right off on the back so it look like it's a little bit more in the morning light. I can invert that layer, and then I can be a little bit more selective with the way that I brush that in. So I just put the darkness on the back of the bird here, so it's not too aggressive. And I've just highlighted, increase that shadow a little bit, just so the bird looks like it's more in the morning light, and it's got the light coming from the same direction as the clouds. So I'm selling the story because I'm working with the context of the lighting in the background that I've put on it. Yeah. I quite like it.
Thank you, Tim.
We need a
You make it look so easy.
Yeah, we're down to 50, so we're in a more manageable size.
Thanks very, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I've got to get back to year 10 logarithms now, so I better go.
Yeah, the whole idea is just to make the program a bit more accessible and to give you a little bit of a vision as to what you can achieve, and if you need a little bit of a hand working on it, then but you can see the power and the impact that it can have on an image with with very few adjustments, and very powerful program.
That was wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
That's right. Thanks, Elaine.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tim and Robin.
No,
Thank
pleasure.
you.
So,
Very generous with your time and knowledge. Thank you very much.
sharing the love.
Thank you, Tim. You and your wife.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
And Robin.
Our pleasure.
Robin, for that.
Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you.
We'll
Got
catch up
some
next
more
time.
got some more tips from you, Tim.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Get on that mailing list and we'll catch up next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Tim.
Look forward to
Bye.
it.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.